It has been referred to as the greatest movie never to have won Best Picture, a film which didn't cut it at the box office, but gained immortality through word-of-mouth late-night TV broadcasts and the subtle emergence of VHS and cable. The Shawshank Redemption is greater than it is as a tale of a man escaping from prison. It is a reflection on hope, desperation, friendship, and the long struggle to redeem. To millions, it is the supreme testament to film's ability to inspire. Yet, under the surface of familiar story of Andy Dufresne lies a series of secrets, decisions, and off-screen facts that totally transform the way you may view the movie. These are not easy trivia facts intended to stuff a fanzine. These are the lived history of the cast and crew, the subtext embedded in the cinematography, the symbolism cleverly selected in order to make Shawshank speak on a higher human plane. And when finally uncovered, they take this familiar tale to new depths, illustrating why, after all these years, it continues to hold people in thrall. The movie that nearly didn't happen is the most startling of all. When Frank Darabont first came to Stephen King with the idea of bringing his novella Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption to the screen, the production looked dead in the water. King felt the novella too introspective, too reliant on Red's silent commentary and Andy's brooding determination. How could so contained a tale be brought to the screen? And so, King consented, selling the rights to Darabont for $1. This was part of his Dollar Baby scheme, an opportunity he extended to new unknown directors to bring his shorter pieces to the screen for less than symbolic reward. That dollar ended up giving Darabont something most first-time directors never get: liberty. Tim Robbins would come to remember they weren't working in the tight scrutiny of studio executives anticipating a hit. The pressure was low, the creative freedom was great, and the story was let to tell itself. Morgan Freeman himself said it best: the movie that went on to become the #1 film on IMDb began as something of an afterthought in Hollywood's mind, a mid-range prison drama no one thought would count. This odd, unassuming start reflected Andy Dufresne's own trajectory, ignored, underestimated, but bound for greatness. One of the most significant decisions was shooting not on a constructed set, but within the very real Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio, shut down just a few years before for inhumane conditions. The prison had a gravity that cannot be replicated. Clancy Brown, who portrayed the sadistic Captain Hadley, revealed that something happened to each of the cast members who walked through those rusty gates. The despair leaked out of the walls. The cramped 6 by 8 foot cells were claustrophobic, bearing down on the mind in ways no amount of method acting could possibly duplicate. Tim Robbins would sometimes sit in the cells between rehearsals just to catch the panic that erupted when the heavy doors slammed behind him. Even the extras weren't background players. Dozens had indeed served time in that very prison. Their aged faces, their tiny, tentative movements of caution and resignation weren't the product of trained performance, but memory. Frank Darabont demanded reality, and he received it in every shot. Production designers even altered the appearance of the prison walls over decades, causing them to be just a little cleaner and less corroded in earlier times, a fact so subtle that most viewers never even caught on, but one that subliminally directed their perception of the passing of time. For the actors, becoming their characters involved more than the script. Morgan Freeman created a whole history for Red, picturing him not merely as a convicted killer, but as a guy who used to run numbers in his neighborhood, who had influence before it was all taken away from him. This background accounted for his comfort as a fixer, his sense of understanding Andy's quiet command, and the underlying tone of loss he bore in his eyes. Robbins developed two Andys: the Andy the prison knew, formal, guarded, chill, and the Andy that only came out in private moments, unencumbered in his movements, exposed in his aloneness, the man behind the mask. The distinction was so subtle most viewers never consciously noticed it, yet it shaped every scene. James Whitmore's Brooks was even more personal. He based Brooks's loneliness on his own father's late-life depression, suggesting the unforgettable bird-feeding moment himself, a touch that made Brooks feel achingly human. These decisions took what might otherwise have been stereotypes, the wise storyteller, the stoic warrior, the broken-down old man, turned them into living individuals whose hope and pain seemed legitimate. Intertwined into the movie is a thick tapestry of symbolism. Darabont and his cameraman placed Andy behind bars, stair railings, fences more times than any other character, even outside of his prison cell, a visual reminder that he bore a deeper incarceration. The burden of innocence, the double life of his escape plan, the cage of silence he chose to bear. The rooftop scene, in which Andy does favors for the guards in exchange for beer among his fellow inmates, is not an isolated instance of friendship. It's the start of Andy's evolving into the prison's unofficial financial planner, the first hint at the persona that will ultimately set him free. The beer is not only a symbol of enjoyment, but the first payoff of a long-planned con, the first glimpse of his getting out. Even the weather does. Every violent act or death is preceded by a storm, from the sister's rampage to Tommy's death to the warden's suicide. Andy's escape takes place on a violent thunderstorm, nature reflecting his desperate struggle for freedom. But only in the last scene, when Red finds him in Mexico, does the sun finally shine unclouded. For the first time, we encounter beauty untainted, and that warmth is the message that says the story is now over. The images on Andy's wall also have their own sequence of meaning. Rita Hayworth, Marilyn Monroe, Raquel Welch. Each of these posters not only represents a decade, but Andy's own transformation. Rita, stately and dressed, is the old world. Andy went to prison with bound and proper. Marilyn is seduction, multifacetedness, and the start of freedom. Raquel Welch, bare nearly all in a primitive environment, is rebirth. When Andy crawls through the tunnel past her image, by then he is prepared to come out naked of civilization's restraint, reborn into liberty. Frank Darabont himself attested that this sequence was by design, each poster an episode in Andy's life. Even the most iconic line, "Get busy living or get busy dying," was something more than a savvy piece of dialogue. It was the core philosophy of the movie, scribbled on the production office wall to inspire all decision-making. Every Shawshank character reflects that choice in their own manner. Brooks, who could not adapt, elected death. The warden, who was faced with justice, made the same choice. Andy and Red at some point elected life, although for Red, too late in an agonizing manner. The iconic bus scene in which Red recounts how he decided to join Andy in Mexico was not in the initial script. Freeman added that it was included when the filmmakers noticed that Red's arc was incomplete without it. The studio was insisting that the story conclude ambiguously with Red entering into an unknown future. Darabont battled for more, demanding the story was not only Andy's but Red's too, and Red required redemption, not merely release. The same applies to Brooks's subplot, which was significantly amplified from Stephen King's novella. Studio executives had wanted to excise it altogether, fearing it dragged the pace. Darabont would not agree, stating Brooks's destiny offered the emotional counterbalance to Red's ultimate decision. Without Brooks, the viewers would never fully appreciate the danger of institutionalization. Without glimpsing Brooks was here etched into wood, Red's subsequent rebelliousness, so was Red, would be insignificant. Brooks added the painful richness to the story, illustrating what occurs when hope is extinguished and therefore rendering Red's survival all the more miraculous. The warden, so persuasively hypocritical with his Bible quotes and iron-fisted control, was not entirely fictional. Bob Gunton based him on real prison officials from America's mid-20th century history, men who exploited inmates as slave labor while preaching morality. Understanding this makes his suicide more than a plot twist. It is the collapse of a man whose entire identity was built on fraudulent righteousness. Like many characters in Shawshank, Norton represents a broader truth about human institutions. And what of the redemption promised in the title? Most take it to mean Andy's exoneration, his flight, and his victory over injustice. But Robbins and Freeman have provided more profound meanings. For Robbins, the redemption is in Andy getting humanity back into Shawshank. He redeems himself and the men around him, learns them to hope, establishes a library, transforms the roof into a place of conviviality, even turns his cell into a place of art. Freeman, on the other hand, finds his redemption through truthfulness. Only once Red finally informs the parole board of the truth, once he informs them that he no longer cares what they think of him, does he become free. Redemption is therefore not an individual man's triumph, but an intertwined tapestry of minor salvations, each prisoner retaining a piece of their honor. Astoundingly, the conclusion we all know and adore nearly never do. The beach reunion, one of the most inspiring moments in cinematic history, was almost eliminated. The studio envisioned the film concluding with Red on the bus, the fate left uncertain. Darabont contended that uncertainty wasn't sufficient, that Shawshank wasn't about hope as a concept, but about hope actualized. He refused to film the reunion, shooting it early on ahead of Robbins and Freeman's having developed their on-screen chemistry to establish a tentative, honest awkwardness in their hug. Now, it is barely possible to imagine the film ending differently. Thomas Newman's music plays its own subtle part. At the start of the film, his score is mechanistic near cold, reflecting the deadness of prison. By the close, warmth creeps in, hope leaks in through the theme, so quietly that a majority of audience members experience it more than see it. The soundtrack accomplishes what Andy does. It sneaks hope into Shawshank bit by bit until it overwhelms the screen. Newman's effort was robbed of the Oscar by The Lion King, but it has been shown that time continues to affirm its long-lasting emotional resonance. However, when Shawshank was released in 1994, it staggered badly. It was released during the same season as Forrest Gump and Pulp Fiction, and took in a paltry $16 million against its $25 million budget. Awards season provided it with several nominations, but the public hardly even noticed. It was the cable and VHS that brought it back from the dead. On TNT, it became a ritual for millions of viewers who couldn't help but leave it on whenever it played. It expanded not by hype, but by patience, much as Andy's laborious tunneling. By the late 1990s, it had reached cultural phenomenon, and by 2019, it had topped IMDb's user ratings for more than a decade, even outranking The Godfather. Even the prison, originally a crumbling ruin, was redeemed. The Ohio State Reformatory is today preserved as a tourist site, attracting more than 100,000 visitors annually. Andy's cell, the escape tunnel, the huge halls, all are memorials not to punishment but to narrative. The Shawshank Trail runs through Mansfield, Ohio, restoring the economy and infusing the town with pride. A town once notorious for brutality is now notable for art and hope, a transformation no one could have imagined. Why does The Shawshank Redemption last and so many other movies disappear? Maybe because it resonates with something common. The jails we all bear either regrets, situations, or fears, and freedom's potential if we are willing to hope. Freeman so aptly has said it. The movie recognizes that hope is not convenient. It is frightening. It is risky. And yet, it is indispensable. That nuance, hope as salvation and danger, makes Shawshank stand apart from trite inspirational stories. It does not sermonize. It illustrates. It doesn't give us simple answers. It leads us through decades of despair until the light at last feels deserved.